Welcome, everyone, to the Squid and Ultimate Elite Fan Show. I'm Mike Wilson, the Ultimate Elite fan. Joining me, as always, my winger, Ricky Squid Vibes. Squid, the crazy season for NHL has begun.
Uh, I was shocked, Mike. I got to admit, I was completely shocked that some of the guys, the money they got, Philip Deneau going to LA and getting
Yeah.
5 point some million dollars when he was basically a defensive centerman. Um, I was pretty shocked. Probably about 100 signings today, and I mean that's just incredible. But teams are moving money around. You look at Tampa, Coleman's gone, Paquette's gone, uh, Tyler Johnson was traded. They made a lot of moves and cleared a lot of cap space.
Well, the funny thing is, Zach Hyman officially in Edmonton, which was the worst kept secret. But, Spit, I was thinking the other day, now that's a dangerous thing, me thinking. But even though Zach is a terrific player, his dynamic optically is going to reach, like at that level, is now going to be magnified even more because of the money. At around $2 million, he was great value with pretty much anything he did a bonus. But now, on term with a good ticket, those bonuses are expected, if not demanded. And you can say the same about Seth Jones, who was very cheap at under $5 million, now making that big number, a little over close to $9.5 million on term. Blake Coleman, there's a guy who everybody raved about in the playoffs, but that was a third line player making less than $2 million. He's now making just a snick under $5 for 6 years. That's top six money. So it's going to be interesting. And those are just a couple. There's numerous other guys, like you just mentioned, these other guys, I'm wondering, and you've probably been in a situation like this too, where all of a sudden you get a big raise. That little added pressure going into camp and playing, it could go sour, and it could go sour fast for some of these guys.
Yeah, I think it could. I mean, but I mean, they're for the most part, they're guys that have been through the wars and the ups and the downs, and they know what's going on. And I think just getting the extra money, I'm sure it's going to affect some of them. There's no question.
Yeah.
Dougie Hamilton is a guy that I think, playing at $9 million now all of a sudden in a place like New Jersey. I mean, I don't think he's going to be that effective, to be quite honest with you. I mean, I was shocked that he got $9 million. I wouldn't pay him more than $6 million probably because I don't think he plays hard enough and physical enough for his size. I mean, yeah, he's a good defenseman. He joins the rush. He can create some offense. But $9 million, I'm sorry, but I think that's way too much for a guy like him.
And of course, they got Subban making the same. So, and he's not exactly known for being a defensive specialist. So they've got some work to do there. So, boy, oh boy, I mean, there must be another shoe to drop. But let's look at some of what the Leafs have done. Now, they showed up in goal. Darcy Kemper, apparently the discussion was had by Kyle Dubas, but the asking was too much. Mrazek in goal. They're getting a little bit of heat for giving him 3 years at just under $4 million. But you know what? The way I look at it, Squid, if it works out, Campbell's an unrestricted free agent next year, so that lets you move with him with Joseph Woll, who we keep going to, and he hope he's going to advance at some point. Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't work out, really buying out that contract for another 2 years, which turns into 4 years, it's really not a lot of money. So it's not a big risk, I would say. And that's probably the only way I could get him anyway is with the term, because he wouldn't have come for less.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, Mrazek is a good goalie. I mean, he's proved that he can play in the National Hockey League and be successful. I mean, if you look at his numbers, 24 shutouts, he's 2.61 goals against, but his save percentage is .910. Not stellar. I mean, it's good, but it's not really good. But, but he was also playing on a very good team in Carolina.
Yeah.
And, but there's going to be a lot of pressure on him, regardless of not because of the money, but just because he's coming into a new place and he's expected to win and he's expected to play extremely well, and that's why they brought him in. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on him, and but with him and Campbell, and when you combine their salaries, I mean, it's not that bad. Mm-hmm. It's pretty good if they can get the job done. Kind of maybe not quite a platoon situation, but maybe Mrazek plays like 55 games and Campbell plays the rest, and they get the job done. The big thing is they got to win in the playoffs. I mean, it doesn't matter what they do in the regular season. I mean, we all know that. Everybody talks about it.
Oh,
It's what you do in the playoffs. And, I mean, if they get by the first round, then all of a sudden, I mean, I look at who they got, and yeah, they got a couple of young guys that are promising in Bunting and but they also brought in Dahlstrom. I mean, he's only played 64 NHL games, and
David Kampf, Curtis
Viega.
Gabriel.
Yeah, and he's 28 years old. I'm assuming he's on a two-way. I'm assuming that's probably for the Marlies more than
Yeah.
likely. And I don't know. I don't. I just don't. When I look at that list, one guy stands out as a guy that I think could help him, and that's Mrazek. Other than that, if Bunting comes along, great.
Yeah.
Because he seems to be kind of growing as a player. But again, I mean, I don't see anybody on that list that I wrote down that's really, really going to help this hockey club.
Well, we've been accustomed to that with Kyle Dubas. This is his mantra, or his style is to bring in players and bring in depth players and look for that one that can stand out. Galchenyuk, either argument you could make last year that it was a success or not a success. He's still out there. They could circle back to some players once the dust all settles to see who maybe didn't get what they wanted and go back to one of these guys. So it may not all be over, but they do want to drag a little bit of money into the season just to save themselves a little bit of room instead. But Bunting, as an example, does have a Sault Ste. Marie tie right back to Dubas. So it's always good to have that. But apparently he left money on the table to come here. So he smells opportunity with 2 left wing spots open on the top 6. So there's a few guys going to be vying for those spots. So I would suggest there's going to be some pretty good competition.
Yeah, I think there will be. And, but again, you lose a guy like Hyman. I mean, who's going to fill that role? You lose Foligno to of all teams, Boston, in your own division. And Boston signed a couple other guys, and they got Hall tied up.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like they're gonna have a pretty good hockey team.
They always do.
And they always do. And you know what? It's funny because everybody goes there, and I don't think there's one player on that team that makes over $7 million.
No, they don't.
But yet they're happy, they win, and they want to play in Boston. I mean, that. To me, that's the way to build your team is to have a good culture, a winning culture, and a culture where everybody that goes there knows that, look, you're going to be treated extremely well here by the Boston Bruins, but you're not going to make a ton of money. You're going to make good money, but you're not going to make a ton. And I think that's the recipe, I think, for success in the National Hockey League.
So to be fair to say that, now how about Seattle? That was a nice signing of Philip Grubauer today, and all those Carey Price saying what was Ron Francis doing, and I like that maybe they want to backtrack that comment now after signing Grubauer. And some of the signings they made today with Lysiak, and they really stepped up today and went to free agency very aggressively. So very impressed with what they've done. And Chicago, let's not ignore what they've done now also with Fleury coming in and some of the acquisitions they made. So there's a real sort of win now attitude you can see in this NHL as everybody's really grasping onto that. And this sense of urgency that we're seeing from all these teams, boy, it's going to make it even tougher to win.
Well, the thing, you look at Chicago, as you mentioned, I mean, they get rid of Keith and Seabrook, I believe, and they bring in some, younger guys, and they bring in Fleury, hopefully, to play a couple more years and hold down the fort in net. Teams are, they're starting to make those changes because of the flat cap.
Yep.
And they've got to get rid of some big salaries of older players. And, you saw a lot of players, older guys who went from one team to another and signed for like the minimum or, $800,000. And that's kind of the way it's going to be until this flat cap ends and it starts to go up again. and that's what you're going to get.
Well, that could be a good segue to my. You're not. I'm throwing this one out today, Squid. Here comes my rant for the day. Okay, because it was setting up into the
Okay.
next story I wanted to talk about. But here I was minding my own business. I turned the TV on to look at some of the updates in the free agency, and the first thing out of the mouth of the sportscaster, I won't say the name of the station, TSN, was the Leafs and their free agency sign. And the first words were the longest team without winning a Stanley Cup, 54 years, 67. They're going on and on. What in the name of Conn Smythe does that have to do with signing Peter Mrazek? Now, what makes this even more compelling and worse for me is I happen to be turning 67 tomorrow. And now I've got to listen to that for the next year. And that's the narrative is going to be 67. They're going to keep hounding at me. That's my birthday present. Now, what that was segue to was James Myrtle wrote a tremendous article, I'm sounding like Donald Trump, in The Athletic the other day on cap flexibility with the NHL teams. Now, it may surprise all these experts out there that the Leafs, by the way, aren't even in the top 10 with the worst numbers going into the cap as of today. They're about middle of the road. Now, one of the complaints was the fact they only had 16 players under contract with just around $10 million to spend. The league average currently as it's sat going in today was $61.9 million. Players signed were 16.7. The estimated restricted free agent cost was $6.8 million, with 2.7 restricted free agents to sign. The Leafs had none. Dead cap space was $1.5 million. Long-term LTIR space was $1.4 million. Cap space was around 12.8. The Leafs are around 10. Now, the thing is that let's get it clear.
You probably lost me when you started talking about the cap.
Well, here's the thing. Here's what everybody has to understand. Let's review this one more time. Now, we've been critical of the big four ourselves outside of Tavares and maybe Matthews. You and I on our shows, we've talked about this. But putting that aside, when they signed the big four, and I'm going to be repetitious here, but there was no pandemic. And with the new TV deal going, right, the cap probably would have been closer to $90 million today as opposed to a flat cap of 81.5. So if the cap, say, had been how would those contracts work today? With
some good free agents.
Well, how would that a cap work today? Those four guys signed with $18 million to spend. So
yeah, absolutely, I agree with you, and eventually it's going to get there, But can we wait another 2 years?
Well, the counter argument to that is what good teams do, and as you pointed out during the playoffs so succinctly, was the fact that Toronto did not adapt to what Montreal was doing. Good teams do that. Good coaches do that. As a general manager, you do have to adapt to what's in front of you, expect the unexpected. What we're seeing so far hasn't really occurred, but again, as it unfolds, he's throwing the dice in, and he's taking another shot with this lineup as it is with some add-ons, unless there's a trade that does take place.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you lose Bogosian, who I thought played pretty good for them last year. You lose Freddie Anderson, who was, I guess, your number one goalie until he got hurt and Jack Campbell took over. But again, you're left with a bunch of guys making under $1 million. Some of them older, like Spezza and Simmons and those type of players. And how much longer can those guys produce the way? Well, Spezza looked great last year. Simmons didn't look that good. He was hurt. He had some injuries. I understand that, but he's getting up there in age too. So those injuries, could linger. And I don't know. I just. And trading away the first round pick for Foligno, who now is a Boston Bruin of all places. I don't know. I just, it's frustrating to watch, I guess, for me. But again, if the pandemic didn't come around, like you said, the cap might be 90 or 95 million by now. And then those four guys at $40-some million wouldn't make any difference.
But
and they'd be able to sign some good players, and they'd have a good roster.
But they aren't.
But they aren't, and that's the reality of this situation. And you look at what Chicago did. They cleaned out all kinds of cap space,
Yeah.
brought in some younger players and uh, guys with lower salaries, and they might be a fairly competitive team next year. But again, I go back to the Boston Bruins. I mean, they're one of the best teams in the league every single year, and there's a reason for that, and that's the culture and the fact that everybody that plays there knows. Like Taylor Hall, you look at. I mean, he signed for $10 million with Buffalo, a 1-year deal, gets traded to Boston, plays really well in Boston, and then he signs for $6 million a year for what, 4 or 5 years? I mean, that just tells you right there that he wants to play for a winning team.
Well, that
So,
winning breeds that, and that's what's been lacking. And once it happens here once, and it will happen, and hopefully it'll happen in our lifetime. The clock is ticking, and Toronto did spend a lot of money today. And as I said earlier, I think we have to wait and circle back and see who didn't get picked up and who didn't get signed. And outside of a trade, that's the only way they're going to see any upgrades from here. So we'll see what it is moving forward. But in the meantime, Squid, you've heard the old term, good luck, good management. So on that note, we want to offer Kyle Dubas some encouragement with this thought of the day. Are you ready?
Oh, I'm always ready, Mike.
I know that.
I was born ready.
You're born ready. So here you go. The amount of good luck coming your way depends on your willingness to act. Let that one sink in.
I agree with that. I agree with that. I mean, you can't count on luck. You're right. Like, if your luck comes by being a little bit bold sometimes and making hard decisions, like you look at the Raptors. Like we talked about the Kawhi Leonard situation, a guy who played 9 games a year before, and they made that deal. They gave up a real good player in DeRozan, and they go on and win the championship.
Well, that's right. That's
enough said.
The Raptor moment. Anyway, the next week should be promising to be very interesting as things unfold a little further when teams sort of settle in and see where their rosters are at. So on that note, we want to leave you guys. Once again, thanks for listening, everyone. Join us again next Monday. We'll actually probably go to next Wednesday because the holiday. For an update in Leafland and hockey in general, don't forget to tune into this week's episode of Squid, the Ultimate Leaf Fan, featuring Billy Gardner, which is very interesting. He gave us a very good guest. So, guys, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.